Welcome back to another episode of APositive Insights. My name is Darren Cottrell, and today I'm joined by Richard Spencer from AgeInc. Richard, thanks so much for joining me today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Darren.
You're welcome. How are you after that long walk to find us?
I am cooling down.
I'm sorry to remind you about that, but why not let the viewers know that you went somewhere? Well, I actually went to the wrong place as well.
We've had a mare.
We've had an absolute mare, but we're here now, and we're here to talk about an important subject, ageism. It'd be good to start, actually, Richard, a little bit of background about yourself and AgeInc.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is not in AgeInc. You'd be surprised to hear. My background's really in marketing, digital, customer experience, both here and in the Northern Hemisphere. So about half my career in and out of London, around Europe, and about half down here in Australia and Asia Pacific. And I was essentially I left a previous employer a couple of years ago, and I was looking for something that I could get my teeth stuck into that was a bit different.
Yeah.
Started to have a couple of conversations in and around aging and ageism, and I think it's a term that we've all heard, but it was something I certainly didn't understand, and I didn't understand how pervasive the problem is. And so with a few more conversations, a bit more research, a bit more digging around, and connecting to the aging population, which we can certainly get into, but that is something I'd used in previous roles in marketing recruitment businesses. The two elements combined take the ageism problem from being something that's altruistic to something which is a real organizational imperative for most employers as we go forward over the next few years, because we just literally begin to run out of people who are under the age of 50. And ageism kicks in at 50 if you're a bloke, and 45 if you're a woman. So it's another one of those kind of gendered issues, is that ageism kicks in slightly younger for women than it does for men.
Yeah, wow. Why is that?
Excellent question, and there's no really good answer. Yeah. I think probably it connects to things like menopause, which begin to kick in for women typically around kind of 45, 50, 55. But there's no sensible answer as to why there is a problem with kind of gender in the workforce anyway. So yeah. It's another one of those issues that kind of makes no real sense, but absolutely has traction.
Yeah, right. So how significant is ageism at the moment?
Massive and not talked about. And so that's part of the problem. So the problem of not getting back into the workforce if you for whatever reason you fall out over 45 or 50 is really quite significant. 53% of people who are aged over 50 say they have experienced ageism during a recruitment process. 21% believe they're currently being discriminated against by their current employer just because they happen to be aged over 50. So it's a very significant problem, but the most significant part of the problem is we don't talk about it. So if you think about the other major prejudices in that you might experience in an Australian workplace, gender equity, racism, lack of First Nations recruitment, homophobia, or any of those kind of areas, those are prejudices that are well known, not necessarily well dealt with, but certainly well known.
Yeah.
There are training programs and normally kind of conversations and or online learning elements that most organizations will begin to bear on that. I think most hiring managers would be comfortably aware that if you made a negative hiring decision or a negative decision about an employee because they're a woman or they had a different sexuality or they were a different color or a different creed, you would accept that, and you would probably know you were breaking the law.
Yeah.
I've met lots of hiring managers who don't know not hiring somebody because of their age is illegal. Like, so it's that badly talked about that people believe you can go, yeah, you're just too old. And that's an acceptable reason to not give somebody a job.
It's crazy.
It's staggering how little we talk about it, given the size of the problem in essence.
Yeah. I really was not aware of the problem until we met and we started talking about it and how significant it actually is. Like, why are we overlooking a mature worker?
Mostly, well, pretty much exclusively because the stereotypes around people who are older, for want of a better description, are sticky, really, really sticky. Erroneous, as most stereotypes are.
Yeah.
But really sticky, and again, partly because we haven't been down that route, haven't had those kind of educational conversations. So I'm old enough to remember when gender equity conversations really started to happen inside corporates certainly in Europe was in the late 90s. And it started with addressing the stereotypes that, you don't put a woman into a senior leadership position because they can't cope with the pressure. Don't have a woman running a team with men in it because men won't work for a woman. All of these things that we now know are completely erroneous were facts in the, up until the late 90s.
Yeah.
We've got the same problem with age. So people who are a bit older are set in their ways, long in the tooth, can't teach an old dog new tricks, all that kind of stuff, are too expensive, too experienced, won't work for somebody younger. And my favorite are not capable of adapting, won't accept new technology. And all of those are, you hear quite regularly if you talk to anybody in the space, all of those are incredibly sticky because we haven't started that education process. My favorite, as I mentioned, is the technology piece. So I'm 55, so I'm bang in the middle of this bracket where it starts to become a problem. My first role in the UK was in a recently privatized water company. So coming out of government, coming out of the government sector in 1992. When I started in 92 on my graduate training scheme, we had a typing pool in the office. So there were no, you laugh, I have to explain this to you.
Yeah, please explain. What is that?
Exactly right. So there was no facilities to type anything yourself. So you hand wrote everything, you filled in a form, you submitted that to the typing manager. She, in this instance, allocated it to somebody in the typing pool. They typed it up, came back, you edited it, went back in, came back out. So a letter would take, particularly for a graduate trainee, because you're right, down the bottom of the priority list, would take a week. Now, generative AI in one shape, form or another writes everything for me first, as it does for most people as first draft. So in my career, I've gone from typing pools to generative AI with every jump along the way, including the internet, cloud computing, mobile technology, desktops, laptops, so everything along the way. But it's my generation that can't adapt, and it's my generation that can't use new technology. So again, it's just these stereotypes are super sticky, and they don't tend to go away. Yeah. Because we're not talking about. We're just not having the conversations that would address some of these things, which are fundamentally problematic in terms of hiring somebody in their kind of 50s and 60s.
So it's proven you can manage change.
You can.
It's actually proven.
Well, yeah. We all adapt all the time, right?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, even if you started work before 2007, you started work without an iPhone in your pocket. If you started work post 2007, you've always worked with a smartphone. But if you think about the iterations of that change alone, we accept that that's normal and okay, and everybody can do that. But again, we haven't adapted to these things. 2007 is 20 years ago, right? Like, so you could be comfortably into your mid 40s, and approaching the point at which you would be considered not capable of using new technology, but you started your first job with an iPhone in your pocket. Yeah,
wow. 2007 was 20 years ago. Wild.
I know, well, that's like absolutely. I still think the 80s was like
yeah. So why is overlooking a mature worker like a missed opportunity, and why do recruitment agencies overlook candidates in this space?
And I think, recruiters will tell you that the clients don't want to see them, and I think, and that's definitely there's fact in that, there's reality in that.
Yeah.
That many clients, not all clients, many clients are not expecting to see candidates on a shortlist aged in their 50s and 60s, subject to roles and subject to hierarchy sometimes, and subject to seniority, but still unusual that you'd see lots of people hired in senior positions with resumes in their 50s. Now, the recruiters, the recruitment agency, the recruitment industry generally is a gatekeeper for some of this stuff, and is an educator to the client as well. So there's a real opportunity for recruitment agencies to begin educating their clients around something that they probably haven't heard of either, particularly around ageism and then the aging population, which is why it's an issue to overlook these candidates. But if we begin the education process now as an industry, clients will be getting more used to seeing candidates in their 50s and 60s on shortlists before we absolutely need them in the workforce, back in the workforce, or staying in the workforce longer. Yeah. And so that's the problem with the aging population, is that we are definitively and unequivocally getting older globally, but definitely here in Australia as well. And 2030 is a real turning point there. And so I think we've been, if anybody who's been involved in recruitment over the last 20 or 30 years will have heard the concept of the aging population. Yeah. But it became, I think it became a bit of a kind of throwaway line, a bit like war for talent was in kind of like 90s and early 2000s, that it became so often talked about that we forgot that it actually at some point in time was going to really impact organizational capacities. And so that turning point is 2030. So in 2030, every baby boomer is 65 or older. The oldest Gen Xers start to turn 65, and millennials start to turn 50. So you got like this kind of the youth of today, like the youth of 15, 20 years ago turning 50. And that really exacerbates that aging population piece that takes us close to 40% of our entire population being aged over 50 by 2040. Now, the point there being, and what's quite often missed in the aging population conversations is as our population ages, so more and more of us are aged 50 and over, the traditional hiring bracket, that experienced hire 25 to 50, drops away by just short of 11%. So as we age, that traditional kind of experienced high, middle, senior management bracket drops away. Right. And now those people are quite hard to find anyway. Less so maybe at the moment, but as the economy picks back up, because it will, as the labour market tightens, because it will, because it always has, and it always will again, those people will get harder to find. We won't be filling shortlist or jobs unless we start to think about extending that kind of age discrimination point out to at least 60 rather than 50, because there are so many more of those people will be aged in their 50s than ever before.
Yeah. So like in terms of like roles or like levels of roles, like is this applicable for entry level, mid management and senior roles? Like where do people hire 50-year-old? Like I think I mentioned to you when we caught up, like we hired our CFO. Yeah. And no offense, Mark, hopefully he doesn't mind me mentioning this on the podcast, but he would be early to mid 50s. Great hire. We've hired him because of his experience. Yeah. Surely, like at least in the C-suite, like the exec sort of level, you would want to consider those people.
Yeah, you'd think so.
Yeah.
I would.
Yeah.
Yeah, no question. But lots of organisations don't, and it's hard to rationalise why in a role like CFO, where somebody your colleague was going to have close to 30 years experience, why that's not valued more than it is, and for some reason it's devalued. So there are lots of hiring managers will tell you nobody looks past the last 5 years of experience. So you might have 30 years of experience, but the last 5 is the most relevant.
Right.
But if the last 5 is senior, surely that's more relevant to a CFO role than if you're kind of growing up into that role. I think there is, again, one of these stereotypes is that you hire somebody in their 50s and they're just waiting to retire. Which is, I mean, again, erroneous but sticky, right? As a stereotype. Yeah. You can't retirement age is 67 in this country. If you're going to pick up the aged care pension, which most people who are in the C-suite are probably never going to get anywhere near that kind of asset test. But if you're living in one of the major metro capitals in this country, you are not retiring.
No, you need
in
to
your early
work
50s,
longer.
right?
Yeah.
There's just no way.
Yeah.
And most people who've reached that kind of age don't want to give up. They want to keep going in some way, shape or form. They want to keep working. So they're definitely not thinking about retiring. But again, that's the stereotype. If I hire a CFO in their early 50s, I'm going to replace him in a couple of years, him or her in a couple of years, because they're waiting to retire. They're just waiting to get out. Whereas the data will tell you, if you hire somebody in their 50s, on average, they'll say 6 years and 8 months. But if you hire somebody in their 20s, as we know, on average, they stay 18 months. But paradoxically, organizations will talk about investing in the next generation by hiring people in their 20s, talking about lifetime value and training and developing people through 5, 10, 15 years of employment. But actually and practically, if that's what you want, you should be looking at people in their late 40s and early 50s to try and get that 7, 8 years of tenure out of them. Equally, hiring somebody into an entry-level role in their 50s could be equally valuable. I've used the example a couple of times by saying, look, I have a marketing background, I've said, but maybe I didn't really like it, but it was okay. Did okay at it, paid the bills, paid the mortgage, all that kind of good stuff. And I actually really wanted to be an accountant. Went back to school, retrained, did an undergraduate degree in accounting, graduated at age 55. And I've said to a few people, if I then applied to your graduate training scheme, am I getting in? And they're like, no.
No chance.
Not, you know what, you wouldn't screen, you wouldn't get interviewed. Like nothing would make sense through the ATS, and you would not make that top however many, and you wouldn't get an interview.
Yeah.
And you go, yeah, okay, I kind of get that. But if you've got a group of graduate trainees, all of whom are 23, 24, and one who's 55, is that intergenerational working, is that team a better team? And everybody I've asked has said, yeah, absolutely. But you're still not getting the job because you're not gonna get to the top. You're not going to get into the interview process. And that's this kind of innate, inherent ageism that comes to bear and comes to fruition because we're not having those conversations about it. We're not having enough conversations about it to raise awareness of the problem, to try and do something about the problem.
Yeah. I definitely agree. There's definitely minimal conversation happening about this. Do you think the AI world is going to impact this? Because obviously you're going to have an AI agent potentially reviewing CVs, potentially looking at experience or age, or do you reckon that will help? Do you reckon that will take away the ageism factor?
It's a really good, so it could help and it could hinder.
Yeah.
So it's not going to go away, right? So it's going to get more and more. And I read of a Chinese energy organization just the other week you had 1,000 internships available and got 1.2 million applications for 1,000 roles.
Oh, wow.
The only way you're doing anything with that is some sort of machine learning, some sort of AI. The big problem with AI as it currently applies to recruitment is that, and anything that effectively is machine learning, and at the moment it's typically an organization's ATS system will be the bit in the recruitment process that is doing most of the machine learning, if that makes sense, is what are we training, what is the data set we're using to train the machine on? And so quite regularly within the context of hiring, the ATS system is being trained by the previous hiring data of an organization, which by its very nature is biased, particularly against age in most cases. And so what the ATS is being told is hire people who look like the people we've already hired. The people we already hired are probably not aged over 50. And in lots of interesting studies in the States, lots of bias against black names, lots of bias against female names, and so on and so forth. Again, not based on hard-coded bias, but based on a bias that comes from learning from a biased data set. Yeah. And so the issue at the moment within the context of AI is how do we train our systems using better data sets that don't have, if you like, prejudice baked into them already. But if we can get that right, then yeah, it should, because it should allow experience to float to the top.
Yeah, you would hope it would give a leveling playing field. I actually had a friend that changed their name on their CV because they just weren't getting interviews.
Yeah.
Because of their name. Yeah, and
which
again I didn't think was a thing either. But
well, my mate started using his middle name for exactly the same reason.
Yeah,
and got more interviews that way.
Yeah,
and again, some of that is probably inherent bias in individuals, but a lot of that is actually inherent bias in the machinery. And we just need to do a better job of thinking about how we train our ATS systems to actually do a better job of screening for us. Because the other thing is that job seekers using a lot more AI to actually match their resumes to the JD or the job ads, right? Yeah. Which means all of the applications are becoming very similar. And so how do you then change that to actually allow the better applicants to kind of float to the top rather than the ones who are just better at using the technology? And so this is the problem we're going to grapple with for a few years, I think.
Yeah. So have you got any more data around the performance, the adaptability, and the productivity of different age groups?
Yeah, I do. You do, but it's quite often it's anecdotal. So it's research driven, and so my problems to a certain extent with research driven answers to these kind of questions is you're kind of biasing the result just because you asked the question in the first place, which is a problem with research in general terms. But yeah, there is, and then you also get into the kind of typical descriptions of generations that baby boomers are set in their ways, Gen X are kind of adapt to technology, then you get back down to kind of alpha who can't speak properly anymore and make up their own words, and then you've got your Gen Z in there who want to be finished by 5, don't want to put the hard yards in, all this kind of stuff. I think those kind of problematic generalizations have probably been directed at every generation all throughout history.
Yeah, sure.
Is there a massive productivity difference between somebody in their 20s and somebody in their 50s? Probably not, I would suggest. Is there arguably, depending on the nature of the role, an opportunity to do it faster because you have experienced it before? Probably. Is there a greater level of resilience in somebody who's been through ups and downs in the economy rather than somebody who's just learning that? Probably. Equally, are younger people arguably better able to work remotely? Maybe not, depending on the nature of how we've kind of got used to some of this stuff during and post-COVID. But I think essentially it ultimately, they're all generalizations, and it kind of comes back down to who's the best person to do the job.
Yeah.
And who's the best person to do the job regardless of all of the things that we should be screening out: gender, race, color, age.
Yeah, no, perfect. So one thing I found really interesting, what we chatted about previously, the future of work, but the multi-generational teams. I'd love to sort of delve a little bit deeper on that. So what does an effective intergenerational teamwork actually look like? Yeah.
And you might or might not be surprised to know that there is literally an international standard on how to build a intergenerational, multi-generational
I did
team.
not know. Tell me.
No, well, I think it's 55550.7, I think, from memory. don't quote me on that exactly, but it's definitely so. But I don't think anybody's going down the route of becoming a certified intergenerational, multi-generational workforce. But it does exist as an international standard. And again, what it is a really simple framework, as is quite often the case with ISOs, but a really simple framework that says you should be more inclusive and more belonging. And there are lots of different things it tells you to do along the way, but it is really that simple. It is an acceptance that everybody is different. Everybody brings something different to the table, but all of those differences in one room make for a better team, whatever that team dynamic might look like. And it's an acceptance of the fact that the differences are a positive, not a negative. And I think that's quite often where multi-generational teams go wrong, is that the differences are seen as negatives, not used as positives, which is can be hard to do.
Yeah, sure.
But there's a great organization called No Umbrellas, run by a lady called Florence Potter, who does I've done it a couple of times with her now, where she does a really simple intergenerational workshop, which not stealing Flo's thunder, but I'm sure she'd be happy to talk to you and or anybody on the call. But essentially it asks people who are in all different kinds of generations to rate what they want out of work right now. And lots of different things come to that. Typically, if you're a bit older in life, it isn't about career development, it isn't about learning, and it isn't about what's the next job and looking for the next promotion and I really want to drive a career. It is value of work. Yeah, sure, I want to get paid, but I want to feel like I'm putting back in. I really want to enjoy the 9 to 5 and all those kind of things. But then she asks the same question to people, saying, can you put yourself back in position of being 22 and answer it as if you were 22? And then you get, I want to drive my career. I want, training development. I want all of the things you currently hear from people who are 22. And the point being, it's not that it's an intergenerational problem. It's just that you have developed and aged and you now want different things because you're a little bit older. Yeah. Not that the current generation wants things you didn't want. You just don't want them anymore.
Yeah.
And so that concept of intergenerational working or multi-generational working is like an acceptance of the fact that we're all at different stages of our careers. We all want slightly different things. We all have slightly different inputs, but every one of those inputs should be seen as valuable, not necessarily erroneous, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's like, we know for a fact that multi-gender teams are better than single-gender teams, and effectively multi-generational teams are better than single-generational teams, regardless of what that product might be, because we all have buyers, and most organizations have consumers and or buyers who are aged from 22 through to 85. But typically you start talking about buyers in their 50s and people go to, okay, if you're a buyer and you're making purchasing decisions in your 50s, you're probably looking at cruises or adult diapers or whatever. But people in their 50s are still
diapers in your 50s.
Yeah, quite.
Hopefully
people in their 50s are buying cars, they're buying cornflakes, they're buying coffee.
Yeah.
33% of Australians in their 50s still have dependent children living at home. 10% still have primary age children living at home. They are making consumer-based decisions like 30-year-olds are. Exactly the same decisions. They just happen to be in their 50s, not in their 30s. And so those intergenerational teams need to effectively take all that into account.
Yeah, right. And there's definitely not a space for having everyone that wants to basically drive their career and get a promotion. So having that blend, it just works because you need pillars in the business that are happy doing that or want more stability and they're happy doing that same role, because you can't accommodate promotions for everyone.
No, and I have this theory. I have no evidence to back it, but I have this theory that organizations struggle a little bit, particularly large organizations struggle a little bit with how to motivate people who aren't saying they're looking for the next promotion. So even if you think about your kind of cyclical personal development kind of meetings, your 6 monthly, whatever they happen to be called in your organization, and they always will involve the kind of what's next for you, what training development do you need, what's the next step in your career. And if the answer is I'm okay, thanks, I'm quite happy where I am, managers kind of go, well, I can't put that in this box. I need something to put in this box. So what else have you got? What else can I do? Rather than going, great.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly, to your point.
You're absolutely satisfied. That's exactly amazing.
And you're knocking it out of the park. Brilliant. Keep doing it. But organizations struggle a little bit with that from a motivational perspective.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's an interesting point. So how should workplaces prepare for the multi-generation? What type of skills, expectations and strengths should they be looking at?
Yeah. And I think it starts, so in fact, in very similar ways to the way we've addressed every other prejudice in the workplace, it starts with conversations. It starts with like a transparency of conversation around the fact that we've got a problem.
Yeah. And
that needs to be age being a part of every element of conversation that might involve bias or prejudice. And we start to track data around that, as we have done other kind of, I hesitate, minorities, but other issues of prejudice within the workplace. And then we need to expand those conversations to the hiring managers through the hiring process. We need to make sure things like at a really basic level, position descriptions take age into account. Job advertising takes age into account. There's some huge amounts of data about how biased the language is in job ads to a much younger audience. It gets even worse if you get ChatGPT or your favorite generative AI agent to write it for you, because you've got that baked-in bias. But even at that front end piece, but then we've got to train hiring managers to be more accepting of seeing resumes from people of all ages for all levels of hierarchy, from entry level and more junior roles through to the C-suite and more senior roles, and be more accepting of the fact that experience adds, not necessarily detracts, not to make assumptions that these people are going to be bored, they're going to want their job, they're going to be too expensive. Because these are the assumptions that would stop people potentially getting interviewed. But the next, and I guess really important piece to your point around the intergenerational working is it's okay. We still need to educate everybody inside the organization that it's okay to be sitting next to somebody who's of a different generation. And that adds value to the workplace, doesn't detract from the workplace. Yeah. I have literally spoken to people who have been rejected through interview processes because they weren't going to be the right cultural fit, which, is borderline illegal, directly illegal, and also completely ridiculous that because of your age, you're not the right cultural fit. That makes that means you've got a cultural problem, I would suggest, if that's the way things are fitting together for your organization. But that whole concept of how do you work with everybody, all the way up through the hierarchy to get people more accepting of people being a little bit older in the workforce.
Yeah, no, it's like after we did meet, I sort of looked back and looked at APositive, and I feel like we've got a really nice blend of age. We've got people from 21 to mid 50s, and we had our Christmas party last week, and the culture in terms of like everyone mixes really well. I feel like, I just feel like we'd cracked it.
Yeah,
and it was really nice to see after that. I didn't realize it was such a big thing, ageism, and then looking back at the business that we've created, I feel like we've done
and look, I think
quite well.
And we, when we spoke, I said the same thing, that the fact that you have hired anybody in their 50s, C-suite or otherwise, makes you quite, relatively speaking, unusual. Not seeing age and being unbiased around that, again, is unusual. But to your point, can create a really valuable culture, can create a very high level, high success, high achievement culture, because you're putting the right people in the right roles, regardless of who they are, what their characteristics are, what their background might be.
Yeah, that's right. And you definitely opened my eyes to, we sort of talked about like, I probably wouldn't have considered someone would want to work in like an SDR role, like in their 50s. But I sort of went away and thought, actually, you might have a really experienced salesperson that just wants to take a step back and they just want to jump back on the phones, and that's what they enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would definitely consider that now. You opened my eyes to that for sure. You really did. So, reducing the bias and changing the pattern. So what does fair treatment look like for all employees?
It looks the same as it always has done, but it's just really hard to do.
Yeah.
It's never been about equality. It's always about equity, right? And but finding an equitable, it's not a meritocracy, because that isn't equitable. But finding equitable opportunities both inside and outside organizations are really hard, because humans are naturally biased. So it is, again, that I think that constant process of staying aware of how to level the playing field, because the playing field's not level for everybody. No. And the thing about age is it's an intersectional prejudice, in that you can be we all hope we're going to get old enough to experience it, right? Which is also a strange paradox about this particular prejudice, is we all want to be old enough to be experiencing ageism. But you can be female and a bit older and experiencing different kind of ageism. You can have a different sexuality and a bit older and experience a different kind of sexuality. You can be a woman and have a different sexuality and be a bit older. So you've got this whole intersectional problem that kicks in around how we make this equitable. And actually, to that point, if you think about all of the time and effort we've spent around gender equity over the last 30 years, realistically, all of that has been leveled at improving and leveling the playing field for younger women. Because once women hit 45, they get hit by this new prejudice called ageism that they weren't aware of, despite the fact that we've spent 30 years trying to improve the equitable position for women in the workforce. what we need to do is extend that and think about, okay, how does this actually play into other areas, particularly something like an age, particularly because it's another gendered prejudice. And we start saying, okay, well, how do we extend what we're doing even around gender equity to all women, not just younger women? So there's lots of work to be done, right? And I think people would tell you, even in the space of gender equity, where we have been looking at it for 30 years, we're not there yet. We're a lot better than we were 30 years ago.
Yeah, much better, but yeah.
But we're not there. And so it's that constantly making sure we're proactively addressing the problems.
Yeah. I still can't get my head around 45 is old.
Well, there's no, yeah, I know. Well, there's in the Australian age discrimination protection legislation, of which there's too much at lots of different levels, as quite often is in Australia.
Yeah.
But the Federal Act from 2004 doesn't include an age. So you can be legally discriminated against at any age, because there are obviously instances where people are too young for a managerial role, or those kind of things. The American Act, by contrast, includes an age, so and that age is 40. So what the Americans are saying is, from the age of 40, you need additional protection from your employer because you're old.
I've just turned 40.
Mate, you're old.
I am old. Brilliant. I do actually feel old. So.
I think, yeah, most people would tell you 40 is not old, right?
No, not
By
not
no
at all.
stretch of the imagination.
No, there's no way.
And some of this is just going back to, old industrial revolution style values, that when you hit 40s and 50s, you were on a slippery slope to end of life.
Yeah.
You're not anymore. Not by any stretch of the imagination.
I used to think 40 would, when you're 10 and your parents are 40, you'd think they're old.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
now 40, 50, I feel like you still got way more value to add.
Yeah. Well, data would suggest that we all feel we're about 13 years younger than we actually are.
Oh, is that right?
So, yeah. So you're probably thinking you're actually in your late 20s.
Yeah. Oh yeah, always. Never going to be old. My mind's never going to be old. Anyway, so how can companies recognise and sort of leverage the strengths of all ages?
Yeah, but the first thing is making sure that when we're bringing people in, we're doing that as equitably as we can.
Yeah.
Second thing is, when actually you've got people inside the organisation, making sure that everybody still feels valued. And again, I have spoken to organisations who were like, we don't have a problem with ageism because 30% of our workforce is aged over 50. And I'm like, great. When did they join? And like, oh well, they joined in their whenever 30s, 40s, and we just have this really long tenure.
Yeah.
And I said to them, well, are they still engaged? Are they still productive? And they're like, actually, funny, that cohort of people quite often scores lowest on some of our engagement surveys. I'm like, that's because they don't feel valued anymore. So there is this, inherent ageism inside organizations as well. So the thing about ensuring that we get the most value out of everybody, retain productivity, increase or maintain engagement, ensure that absenteeism doesn't increase, is about making that culture feel like it is the same for everybody, and that everybody is equally valued. So everybody gets the same training development opportunities. Everybody gets the same consideration around whatever opportunities may or may not exist in terms of kind of perks and benefits that come with working in organizations these days.
Yeah.
Jane is not uninvited to the TikTok meeting because Jane's in her 50s and she wouldn't understand TikTok. And these are live examples that do get kind of bandied around.
Right.
And the jokes go, right? So it's it's some of the stuff that kind of makes people who feel like they're being excluded are things that people don't necessarily pick up. They're the soft factors of colleagues saying, oh, talking about your grey hair or this or that or whatever it might be. We wouldn't have those kind of conversations about women or people with a different sexuality or a different colour, but it's still okay to talk about that from an age perspective.
Yeah.
But again, it's that making sure that those softer discrimination factors that aren't necessarily legislated against don't exist in the organisation, so everybody feels that they're a part of the culture, that there's a place for them, and they can continue to add value and continue to add to that organisation as long as they want to, effectively.
Yeah, no, great. So back to, obviously a lot of our listeners are agency owners, so what can they implement now to create more opportunity or better opportunity for older candidates? Yeah,
I think the big opportunity for recruitment agency owners now is actually to start thinking operationally about what does it look like from a revenue perspective if we don't start leaning into this problem.
Yeah.
And it starts to look like it's going to get harder and harder to fill shortlists. And if you're not filling shortlists, you're not filling jobs, right? It's a really simple, it's a straight line problem. There are some industries where it's less of a problem, where if you have the right skills and you're at the right price point and you're available Monday, you get the job. There are others where there are 17 different interviews and it's much more about cultural matching. Those are probably the ones where ageism is harder to kind of address. But there's a massive opportunity for recruiters to start working with the clients now, to educate them now, and to use the consultant part of the recruitment consultant job title to actually add value to that traction. Now, that might not get you a role, might not get you somebody on the shortlist today,
Yeah.
but it will stand you in really good position in 2 or 3 years' time when the labour market's tight again and you can't find people. The best place to look for people is in those underserved markets. People aged over 45 and 50 is definitively an underserved market right now, and building a brand proposition around being more open to interviewing people who are a bit older in life, but more importantly, having those conversations with clients now, so the clients are accepting of those resumes being on shortlists, is where the real opportunity kicks in. Because it's a straight line problem to revenue. Like you can't get placement fees if you're not placing people.
Yeah,
if you can't find people, you aren't placing people. People where you're not finding them at the moment is 50 plus, and so there are definitely people out there.
So it could be a whole new talent pool, untouched. But in terms of educating the clients, like what's the top 3 things they need to, what type of facts could they sort of educate their clients on to be more open to having someone 50 plus on the shortlist?
Yeah, I would start with and tend to start with the aging population. So, because again, it's a piece of terminology that clients will have heard.
Yeah.
I think everybody's heard the phrase. That's not true. Not everybody understands exactly what it means and exactly what it looks like, but they are irrefutable facts.
Yeah.
Think about we've all done forecasts and budgets, right? Which are a little bit, I'll hope we'll get there, but I can't be right for sure. Thing about forecasting age and age brackets is it's definitive, because you can't be 50 in 2040 if you're not already 35.
Yeah.
So we know for sure how many 50-year-olds taking out immigration there will be in Australia in the labour market in 2040 and 2030 and 2035 and all the way through the process. So these are conversations you can have with clients that say, look, this is a clear and present problem that you can see the data. We start to run out of people at these stages. What can we do about it? And how can we start to get around that process now? Treasury, through its intergenerational report, has our ageing population being one of the top 5 risks to the Australian economy over the next 20 years. Because we just don't have enough people in the workforce as the population ages to use income tax to top up the tax take essentially for the federal government. So it's a massive problem for us everywhere that becomes quite a consultative conversation with clients, because they probably haven't had that conversation with anybody. And it's like, if you are the first person to have that conversation with somebody, next time something comes up that they're interested in, they're going to come back to you to say,
actually,
you talked about that. What do you think about this, or what do you think about that? And it just changes the relationship with the client without going, I want to stop sending you people who are in their 50s.
Yeah.
You do, but it's how you would kind of address that conversation. I'd start with that. I'd start with the fact that lots of people, that 53% of people have experienced ageism as an issue, and then potentially start to talk about the fact that actually lots of ageism is perpetuated by people in their 50s who are in senior roles in corner offices or in senior management roles, who are still discriminating against people in their 50s, even though they're in their 50s.
They're in their 50s.
So, it's kind of a strange paradox in its own right, that again, because we're not having these conversations enough and it's not present top of mind enough, we just fall back on the stereotypes.
Yeah, that's great advice. And talking about advice, we're nearly to the end of the podcast. We like to finish on one piece of advice. Like, what one piece of advice would you give agency owners looking to grow their business?
One piece of, don't be the last agency to this party. Be the first. Because I think, despite the fact that it's been a problem for a while, there aren't enough agencies talking about this now. So there is still clear air to make a very different proposition and a different kind of piece of positioning for your organization around this without alienating anybody else. So there is no hardcore right-wing anti-aging issue. Like, so if you were very positively positioning your organization as being, we're actively targeting female candidates, you might annoy men. If you actively leaning into LGBTQI, you're arguably at risk of offending people on the right wing of politics. There is nobody on that wing to offend if you're saying we're happy to help people of all ages, because it doesn't affect or offend anybody who's younger, and it's just more inclusive of people who are older. So essentially, there is no reason not to think about how you might extend your reach and extend your talent pools, but you want to be early to that party, not late.
Great, Richard. I really appreciate your time. And if people want to reach out to you, because obviously this is something you can help agencies with.
Happy to. Yeah, very much so.
Where can they find you?
Well, AgeInc.au is the website. Richard at AgeInc.au is the email address. Very happy to talk to anybody about that. And I imagine they could get me through.
And you're on LinkedIn? You're on LinkedIn
I'm on
as
LinkedIn. Well, you have to be on LinkedIn.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. No, I am on LinkedIn.
yeah, great. LinkedIn, AgeInc, great. Thanks so much, Richard. Appreciate your time.
It's great. Good chat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the podcast today. Hope you found it insightful. So APositive, we specialise in partnering with recruitment and labour hire businesses across Australia, New Zealand, and soon to be the UK. Whether you're starting, scaling, or an existing business, we're here to support you. Back office, payroll, funding, and payment options. Reach out to us on LinkedIn or come to our website at apositive.com.au. Thanks again.